The WTO is really the vision and the goal of the world's largest multinational corporations, in that it basically set up a system of global governance for corporate rule. It limits government regulation of workers' rights, food safety, the regulation of important services like education and health.
So anytime we have a case that goes in front of that tripartite quasi-judicial forum, we lose 9 out of 10 cases, whether we're from the United States or Canada. So it's a body that's pro-multinational, and it's been really bad for working people around the world.
There's no question that the reason that they wanted to create a World Trade Organization was to have a global organization that would have the power to reach in and tell countries, no, you can't have that kind of a rule or that kind of a regulation.
Under these rules, there are special incentives and protections even for U.S. companies to offshore their jobs to low-wage developing countries. Literally, these agreements, like the WTO, set up special protections if they leave, and then they guarantee that the products can come back with no border taxes, and we're not even allowed to inspect them at the border very thoroughly for safety, for environmental damage. So it's a race to the bottom.
Hidden in it is a lot of talk about, well, we're going to help developing nations and we're going to help poor countries and people are going to come up. But that just really hasn't largely proven true. And the benefits, when you weigh who's made out better in this globalization deal, clearly it's been corporations who have enriched themselves many, many, many times over really the meager progress that workers in those nations have made, and often at the expense of other workers in other nations.
One can ask the fundamental question: does society serve capital, or does capital serve society? Under the WTO, society serves capital.
When the WTO made a decision to have one of its biannual summits in the United States, one of the first set of organizations that got together and started plotting were the Steelworkers and Public Citizen.
And we've been a loud voice and an activist voice in defending the jobs of our members against unfair trade in both Canada and the United States. And one of the things that got us into Seattle, and the Battle of Seattle as it's called, is that we knew that that was going to be an opportunity to bring workers together from all around the world.
Seattle and the WTO didn't just come to us as an event, a thing to do out of the clear blue sky. We had been seeing the effects of this globalization that was going on. We had been seeing the effects of the transfer of jobs out of the country. We were in some of our industries getting crushed by imports that were coming in.
And we knew we could take on this institution and really show the world that even here in the US, in the belly of the beast, where this model had been cooked up and shoved down everyone's throat, real people, the majority of Americans, had no love for it. In fact, we wanted it gone.
There was environmentalists, anti-poverty, farmers, people that cared about the future, and we led that charge to Seattle, so that we had thousands of steelworkers that went to Seattle from both Canada and the United States.
Being in Western Canada, I remember the busloads of activists, steelworkers, trade unionists from British Columbia that went over by the busload to be part of this global initiative in regards to trying to stop what the global corporations were trying to do.
I'm very impressed. I think it's a wonderful event. It's time that we make our voices heard. It's time for labor to come together and tell the WTO we're not going to take what they dish out to us any longer.
My plant closed down officially the first part of August this year, 1999, and it moved to Mexico. The jobs are there now being manufactured out of Monterrey, Mexico for 30 cents an hour.
What ultimately came out was this amazing, historic 50,000 person march of largely unionists, and then a set of other events and protests and etc. that changed the course of history.
We grew up on the learning that wealth accumulated without work is not growth, it is not production, it is theft. The World Trade Organization is organizing a world theft organization.
our coalition of unions, environmentalists, consumer groups, civil rights groups, family farm groups, united together, we can win.
We believe that all people everywhere should share in the fruits of their labor. And this is why we congratulate you, we join you, and we want to fight with you to say no to the behavior of the WTO.
It was very clear that our president at the time, George Becker, was the energy and the strategy behind the labor movement's participation, and he was the voice of what I called anxious industrial workers.
Or nix it! Fix it 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 or nix it! Don't ever forget one thing, that the trade union movement is the most powerful voice that speaks for workers in any nation, including the United States. And when we come together as environmentalists, as human rights activists, and trade unionists, we can literally change the course of history, and we're taking that first step here today. Thank
There
you.
was a big labor rally up in the stadium. Big turnout, a lot of unions, and the unions left the stadium and were sort of heading down an area. And there was a little bit of a sense about which direction are we going here, how's it going to happen.
We marched through the city, and the city had given us sort of a march route, but they were trying to send us in a direction where no one would see us. So the steelworkers split the march off, and we went in the direction where everybody would see us.
The steelworkers and the Teamsters, instead of marching on back to the buses, which was the original plan, but not the steelworker plan, broke away and joined the protesters in the streets. Peaceful, sit-down protests, basically showing our streets, our world.
There became an understanding, at least I became aware of through some of these affinity groups, that there was going to be an attempt made to just not let this ministerial go forward. And it clearly people understood, a lot of people understood that that's what we were there for, not just to march around buildings. We had to do something that meant something. And these little groups were taking over the intersections, and they were moving the big plant potters into the middle of the street, and the kids were using these cement pipes, and they were handcuffing and locking themselves together and linking down, and we helped in that.
And I remember when these young kids had their hands joined through these tubes to block the meetings. I just asked one of them, I said, "Where did you get that?" And they smiled and said, "Gandhi." And I just thought Gandhi and Satyagraha was getting globalized right there.
The result of it was that the WTO ministerial couldn't start. A whole day was taken away from this plan to expand the WTO's corporate rule. And then the police went pretty much nuts and started pounding on, kids chained together, sitting in intersections, singing songs.
And the kids were very sort of surprised that we were there, glad that we were there. And when the violence started later in the day, I think I'm really appreciative because we could stand there and sort of look at the police and say, "Hey, I'm watching you and how you're dealing with this kid." In a way, it was like labor was sort of the adult supervision.
The police overreacted, started tear gassing, started beating on people, and the response was that it just ratcheted up.
And I just saw time after time out there choking in the tear gas, where a great big burly steelworker would get between a bunch of cops with sticks and basically literally say, "Hey, to the cop, buddy, don't hit these kids."
It's like I remember being down on my knees with a kid, some young girl, 17, 18, 19, who had her eyes really in bad shape, and we were trying to water her eyes and get her to the point where she could give her a little more comfort. but it was largely peaceful, but it was portrayed as this kind of anarchy, and it just wasn't that at all.
I have been in so many places where I have watched the police become the protesters, disrupt protests, make it look like it's about violence, because the dictatorship that corporate globalization is cannot even imagine the political space for peaceful protest. So they have to create the violence in order to live in their violent world.
Now, there were some folks that were doing some stuff that distracted from the real message. You don't score any points throwing a garbage can through a window, but that's what they played on TV, as if everybody there was throwing garbage cans through windows. They took the information to that rather than focus on the real issue, which was the unfairness of the global trading system.
Our voices are going to be heard again and heard in the streets of Seattle today.
We wanted to have a visual demonstration of some of the bad decisions of the WTO, in particular around steel. So we got a lot of steelworkers and a lot of other trade unionists. And we not only marched through the streets of Seattle, but we marched to the docks.
I want to say something. I want to say something to the young people, that have joined the steelworkers here. What I saw this morning, I stayed out there in the rain and I watched. I watched youngsters who were peacefully demonstrating, who weren't doing a damn thing to hurt anybody, who went down the streets, and I watched them jackbooted, and there was no reason to do that. You were treated shabbily. If this was my city, I would apologize to you for that happening in this city. And I want to welcome, this is where you belong, right here with the labor movement. When we work together, the action groups, when we take the human rights activists, when we take the environmental activists, when we take the civic groups, when we take our community coalitions, and we ally this with the labor movement, there's no force in the United States that can turn us back.
We had a foam I-beam that looked like a regular I-beam. Then George picked up the I-beam and threw it in the ocean to symbolize that our jobs were in the tank in the ocean being washed away, and it got a lot of attention from the press and the media.
1, 2, 3, steel dumping. Go. 1, 2, 3, go.
But it made the statement. It made the symbolic statement, and in many ways, that was the strong statement we wanted. We could have done many, many, many more of those kinds of symbolic events if we wouldn't have had to deal with the heavy-handedness of the Seattle police.
After literally 11 months of organizing, no sleep, getting rained on and drizzled on for days in Seattle, having arm in arm come around a corner, a column of blue and gold that was a sea of steelworkers coming around the corner. And I just remember looking at that and saying, we all did it. We did it together. And the next day, the announcement that the talks had collapsed was just a moment of enormous happiness and pride because we'd really helped.
The world became aware that all this free trade stuff wasn't what it was cracked up to be, that there were a lot of people in the world who did in fact understand it, weren't just going to stand for it anymore, we're going to force a discussion about what was going on, and this wasn't going to get done by a bunch of suits in a room and without any input from anyone else.
Number one, it stopped the WTO meeting. Number two, the WTO expansion that was supposed to be launched there to even have the WTO have more power over our lives and undermine our well-being was stopped. The people defeated the powers. This was the classic speaking truth to power victory. And it sent shockwaves around the world. First, to see pictures of Americans on the street, opposing, battling this vision of top-down corporate rule, of job-killing, wage-smashing, environment-crushing corporate rule, really empowered and excited people.
So anybody who watches this video has to know that activism can make a difference Political involvement can make a difference, and we need to be active and we need to be involved so that we don't get these kind of rotten economic things forced down our throats in the dark of night.